Well, welcome to Psychology to Live By. Today is another Q&A with some very insightful people. Our topic is There's a Stranger in My Room, and our participants have watched the podcast of that name, which you can see or listen to at my website, drchris.life. But I'll do a quick summary now before we go into our actual Q&A. Well, you scratch anyone in the right place and you'll find insecurity. We are hardwired to fear rejection and to be suspicious of strangers. In fact, recent brain imaging studies show that social rejection is processed by the same areas in the brain that process physical threat. Yet, at the very same time, human beings are extraordinarily social. In our ancestral home in Africa, we survived by being hypersocial. Our literal survival depended on sharing and collaborating with each other. And at a visceral level, we still know this deeply. So, we are very, very concerned with what other people think of us. It comes as no surprise then that social media is like crack cocaine for our species. Even when we know we shouldn't care what others think, we very frequently do. Accordingly, we spend much of our social life in managing the impressions of others. And with the advent of social media and selfies, this type of impression management has grown exponentially. And even when daydreaming, brain networks are constantly exploring social scenarios, creating endless what-ifs and action-packed movies in our mind. So here's a thought experiment. Imagine you're in a largish room. As you enter, the door closes behind you and you check the handle and it's obviously locked. At that very moment, you realise there's a stranger in your room. You talk to them, but they don't respond to you at all. They just look right through you. No aggression, no action, just complete non-regard. How might you be feeling now in this situation? Well, everyone says uncomfortable, on a scale from nervous to downright scared. But why? There's no hint of aggression or danger. Well, the reason is that we need to be able to anticipate socially, and if we cannot, we tend to interpret this lack of feedback as threatening. Now, in normal circumstances, if we were to have this kind of strong negative emotional response to a stranger, we probably should trust our gut. And, this person may in fact be socially deviant and, our perceptual system is just trying to keep us alive. There's lots of practical implications of this. This wired-in bias tends to mean we overinterpret ambiguity as threat. So we should constantly remind ourselves that more or less our world is going to be pretty safe, and the other side of it, of course, is that other people have exactly the same issues. So we should really go out of our way to set them at ease. We can be an enabling space in which people can relax and be their natural selves. We can appeal to the better angels of their nature by bringing forth our own better nature so that we get this kind of more frequent win-win situation where both of us can relax and not worry about the threat of the other. All right, that's enough of that for now. And what I'd like to do is go to the Q&A, and there is everyone. Welcome, guys. I'm interested, as always, in what questions and observations you have having watched the podcast. And we might start with Colleen. Colleen, have you got any observations or questions? Hope I haven't put you on the spot.
No, it's good. A few things came to mind when I watched it. Control was a big thing, not
Yeah.
being able to control your environment and not being able to control the other person. And then the other thing that you always speak so wisely about is an introvert versus extrovert type of personality, is how exhausting that is for somebody who is an introvert,
Yes.
or maybe somebody who's an extrovert really gets a lot of energy from that type of situation. But
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
it, maybe that's part of the control as well.
Well, yeah. So let's start with the control, and then we'll move to the introvert extrovert. Uh, control is a really important issue for human beings, and the most important thing to be able to have some sense of influence over, if we put it in that way, is our social world. So the stranger in my room example is where that breaks down. Where normally, if you talk to someone, they talk back. And now suddenly you've got this terrible situation where you don't know the hell what's going on. And that in itself is threatening, because our survival, in an evolutionary sense, was predicated on being able to predict and anticipate socially, right? So it's very important that we have some influence, i.e. control, in that sense, that we can be socially skilled, right? And because being socially skilled means we're going to be well esteemed in the village, we'll be provisioned well, and we'll attract better mates. You can sort of see how that maps onto modern life. But the second question then, as you quite wisely raise, is about introversion, extroversion, and how those different personalities may mediate these general needs better. And as you know, introverts, they don't do so well with strangers, right? They prefer to be with people, a small number of people with whom they're intimate. That's really when they're in their wheelhouse. It's not that they're necessarily shy. It's a sort of energetic thing. They can feel a bit drained by that. I think that's right. For introverts, the job really is to, and they normally do this, develop social skills that help moderate that tendency. Okay. Extroverts have different problems. And they've got to moderate in the opposite direction. But yeah, very good insights. Who's next? Yep, Terry.
Sure. So I always find it challenging to go into a room of a bunch of people I don't know.
Yeah, that's normal.
I'm a bit of a loner.
Mm.
I'd rather go fishing than go schmooze a whole banquet room of people that I don't know.
Yeah.
And I even have to go to an in-laws wedding on the weekend. I'm like, do I really have to? I have to.
Mm.
I don't have a choice, so I will, and I'll put on a smile and I'll do it.
Yeah.
But it's kind of interesting because I'll be fine.
Yeah.
Lots of conversations. And then in a week from now, or the day after, Jen will ask me, so who'd you talk to and what did you say?
Mm.
And I'll remember very little of it.
Yeah.
And it's just an observation, the fact that I'll remember very little of it, which then will disappoint her.
Mm.
She's going to want to know what I saw, what I learned, and how I enjoyed it or not.
Yeah.
Any suggestions to help me out this weekend?
Well, you happen to be talking to a fairly profound introvert. And so, I was definitely empathizing with you. My general strategy when I go to a party is I look around for, someone who looks, compatible with me, convivial. And this poor schmuck, I grab hold of them and I don't let them go all night. Sometimes at a party I might talk to two people. Because that's what I'm comfortable with, right? And Whereas if I try to do the other thing, go around and have lots of conversations, I don't remember much of that, because for half of that, I'm just sort of navigating, a little bit of anxiety around meeting new people, or, right? But if I can sink into a deeper conversation with someone, I forget all that. We get the social grease out of the way, and then I can forget myself a bit. So that's a strategy that I've used. But the other general strategy, and I'm sure you're going to appreciate this, Terry, is, for me, a perfect weekend, I'll say to my wife, what's happening this weekend? What commitments have we got? And if she says to me none, I relieve an enormous, yes, exactly, sigh of relief and go, yes, perfect weekend. Now, I recognise, I must hasten to add, that this is not true for half of the population. That would be a shocking weekend. So the other answer is that we ought to not, we've got to develop some skills to moderate our tendency, but, as we were saying with Colleen before, but also we shouldn't be pushing against the grain of our natural predisposition. Why would we do that? So, yeah, life's hard sometimes, Terry. Got to go to parties with in-laws.
I'm going to find that one person and glam on.
Yeah, that's it. The poor schmuck. Mm-hmm. Who's next? Chris or Karen?
I can jump in. A couple of things that popped out at me. The first is more of an observation, which is it, and maybe we just see proof points of this sort of all over the place, but how much faster culture and the social layer evolve than our biological layer.
Yeah.
And it seems like the gap between those things is just always increasing, and we're having to think of more and more sophisticated and effective ways of bridging that gap.
Yeah. That's a really important observation. It's obvious that our cultural evolution has massively outstripped our genetic and biological evolution. So we're more or less the same creatures as we were in the Stone Age, physiologically and, neurologically. But the, cultural evolution, the expansion, not only of the village, but having, millions of villages available to us, mm-hmm. massively outstrips the, just the natural setup of our wiring, for this village. So I think this is, it's a work in progress. Obviously, there would be some sort of natural selection happening, albeit slowly, towards us being able to deal with all these different villages that we move through during the day. But I think that one of the things about human beings, about the species, is that we're like, I don't know the exact way to say this, but we're over endowed with the capacity to adapt to new things. So, the young child, the baby, the brain, yes, it has instincts built in, but it also is basically a very, very open system, mm-hmm. so that it can adapt to a huge variety of environments. And of course, you see that play out just by examining different cultures and the way people are very, very different, have different worldviews, different, epistemologies, different, fundamental assumptions. So fortunately, that's the way we are designed, as a very open system. In fact, I think this is right. I think we're born with about 200 billion brain cells, and there's a natural process, of pruning out unused cells very early in the child's life, in the first year, I think, down to about 100 billion. So literally, the body gets rid of half of the, and what overtakes that is all the white tissue, the connective tissue, axons and dendrites that every neuron on average is connected to 10,000 other neurons. Like, it's extraordinary. So I think we do have the capacity to adapt and learn But I still think it's in some tension with some of these, I think, inherent modules we have about how to cope in a small village, right? So, I don't pretend to have all the answers to your question because it's a very deep question, one that's central to a lot of current research. Yeah. But as usual,
Well, I think
yeah,
what's
go.
really interesting about Terry's comment, when he does find that person at the wedding, and you can have this connection with somebody that is really fantastic, and you can have that one-on-one connection.
Yeah.
When you do have that time, and it could be, it could come out of nowhere, but it's just getting to that conversation that is the hurdle.
Yeah, and as I sort of suggested, we do have a bit of a default. It's not so much that we distrust strangers immediately, but we're not necessarily going to trust them immediately. So we've got to do some of the spade work of finding out whether we have things in common, whether I can relax with this person, whether, as you say, it can then be a wonderful experience. And clearly, the history of the species was, there's a lot of intertribal warfare, but also there was a lot of intertribal cooperation and trade and so on. And to the extent that we can get to know a stranger, our anxieties and fears start to drop. When we find commonality in our experience, we start to feel safer and more relaxed. And it's just that I think introverts, it's just a little bit more so for us, and I go out of my way, when I have those conversations, Colleen, at a party, to really make the other person feel really relaxed. And I find that they then become more interesting.
That's right. You're the person that I'm looking for at a party, Dr. Chris.
Why is that, Karen?
That's it. When you talked about like walking into a room where you don't know anybody, like just sitting here listening to it, I felt the anxiety go, like it's just,
what are you doing this weekend, buddy?
Yeah, go with Terry to the party.
Yeah, I'm there for you, Terry. But it kind of like that natural fear of rejection that you talk about, like that just really landed with me of like, okay, that's not, it's a natural thing, right? Like feeling rejected, and like perhaps then that fight or flight response comes in, like, I don't know anybody in this room, I'm out of here. I have the tendency to, like find that person that I know, that I'm going to not have to make small talk with, that it's a comfortable and easygoing situation. So I don't know if that's like a lack of confidence or what it is, but I just absolutely connect with your analogy about going into a room of unknowns.
No, I don't think it's a lack of confidence. I think it's an awareness of your feelings, and a strategy that soothes your feelings. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Why shouldn't you take the course of action that you find most pleasurable?
That's it. Yeah. Right? Feeling safe, having be in the situation. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll do that. I'll do that 9 times out of 10, unless there's a very good reason to override that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And yeah, I think that, this natural tendency to, worry about what people think about us. And I've spoken about this in other contexts, but here's how I actually think about it. All right. The ego is a construction. It's not a real thing, but it's, ego being a sort of placeholder for this notion that there's some sort of self here, right? And I do have a series in the podcast on, I call it the selfless series, right? And so I won't go into it too deeply, but the way I conceive of the ego, it's a bit like, the training wheels that you get on a kid's bike. They've got a 2-wheeler and they'll fall over all the time if they didn't have the training wheels on, right? And at some point, they discover the distinction balance, and they harass the parents to take the training wheels off because they're a big boy or a big girl now, right? Well, I think our need for ego validation and particularly these concerns about will people like me or not. I think for all of us humans, we've got to spend a fair bit of life with our sort of ego training wheels on, and we've got to learn how to navigate the world of esteem and feeling good enough about ourselves. Eventually, hopefully, getting to the point where we've had enough validation, enough evidence that I'm fundamentally okay, that we can sort of drop the training wheels and think about ourselves a lot less and be more absorbed in the world and others rather than self-conscious.
Right. Yeah.
But I have to say that I'm making this up, but it's a hunch. But my hunch is that most people go to their graves with their training wheels still firmly on.
I think that's a safe hunch.
Yeah, but I think there are many who do not. That they gradually learn to drop less of this self-orientation, which, as I'm suggesting in this podcast, is a very natural thing, and we need to learn how to navigate it before we can drop it.
Yeah.
Right, if that makes sense. Well, that feels like a pretty good place to end this Q&A. As always, such a bright bunch of people with good questions. Attractive, handsome, beautiful, insightful, bright. Yes, even you, Terry. No, but seriously, thanks very much. I hope you found that helpful, and I look forward to us catching up whenever we do. Take care, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.